Hello, everyone, and welcome to the beginning of psychology. And my name is Mr. Rodriguez, and I'm going to tell you how it all started and how it all began. And one of the things I want you to keep in mind in reference to this presentation is everything highlighted in yellow, it could be on an exam. So if you see something highlighted in yellow, that's very important to remember. Occasionally, there'll be a word or a sentence or a phrase in white. That's just extra information. But mostly everything is in yellow, and you should keep that in mind for remembering some of the terms you're going to need. Now, the very first word that we're going to cover is this one right here. It's called cognitive. And sometimes it'll be written as cognition. It's intellectual activity, thinking, reasoning, or remembering. So it's any intellectual activity, thinking, reasoning, or remembering. Now, I bring this up is because a lot of the terms that we're going to be covering this semester are cognitive so-and-so, or cognition this and that. So I thought, let me just get that word right out of the bat. Let's be familiar with this term because it will come up quite a bit. So there we go, cognitive. Now let's talk about how did psychology start and the origins of it. Well, let's go back to the great philosophers of Greece, and we're going to talk about them because they actually thought about thinking. They thought about the concept of thinking. Now, in Greece, everyone believed in the Greek gods and believed that everything happened because of the Greek gods. But actually, the great philosophers thought about, well, let's think about why could something happen other than just the gods? And that could get you in a lot of trouble. And it did get this individual in trouble. I'm talking about Socrates. What do you need to know about Socrates? Well, he claimed not to know, but he asked a lot of questions instead, which led us to the Socratic method, something that we use today. For example, let's say somebody said, I would like to be a nurse, okay? You would ask, why do you want to be a nurse? Well, because I like to help people, okay? Why do you like to help people? Well, because it makes me feel good and complete. So by asking questions, we can get to the root of something. So you want to be a nurse to be happy and complete. So Socrates asked a lot of questions, and he discovered that a lot of people did not have the answers. And he claimed not to know everything, but believed in asking questions to get to the truth. And he got in a lot of trouble for not just believing in the gods, and it did cost him his life. Now, everything that we know about Socrates, we know about because of his student Plato. Now, Plato actually was his nickname. Now, I do have here, he started a school called the Academy, and he focused on thinking about thinking. He believed that society should have a philosopher ruler, someone that likes to study and learn. But what you need to know about Plato is he believed in a pre-existing knowledge. He believed not in nurture, that you nurture knowledge, but a lot of it is nature. For example, that the body is just temporary and the soul is eternal, and the soul carries information. So a lot of what we know today, we know through, about Socrates, we know because Plato wrote it down. So Socrates was the first that we have here on this slide. Then we have his student, Plato. And then Plato had a student called Aristotle. Now, Aristotle added a lot to what the previous two philosophers, Aristotle talked about learning and memory, and he talked about motivation and emotion, and he talked about perception and personality, all of the things that are still very relevant today in psychology. And he didn't have our knowledge, but he asked the right questions. And what we need to know, here we go, what you need to know for Aristotle is that he believed not in nature, like Plato, but nurture. It's all about the learned experiences. You have to come up with a hypothesis and see what are the results of that. For example, if I walked every day, what would be the results? Would I become healthier? Well, test it. So he brought up the modern methodology of observe and then make inferences. So what we use today, the concept of observing and then you make an inference on your observation, it came from Aristotle. So you need to know those things when it comes to Aristotle, that he focused more on nurture, the learned experiences, and he helped promote the modern methodology. So there we have the great three Greek philosophers. Now we're going to continue with individuals that have influenced psychology today. Now the next two individuals had two different philosophies. Let's look at this individual right here. We'll get to his name in just a bit. Now, he focused on rationalism and knowledge through thinking, intellectual and deductive. Like if you think about something, if you remove the layers of thought and you get to the truth, you can get through knowledge. You deduce, you keep deducing what is the truth, and that is rationalism. Now, this individual's name is Rene Descartes, and he had that famous expression, I think, therefore I am. But he focused on rationalism. Now, although Rene Descartes focused on rationalism, we had this individual here who focused on empiricism. Knowledge is a sensory experience. You go through it by the physical senses. You observe, and after you look, then you can make an inference and you can make a decision based on what you've seen. His name is John Locke. So, make sure that you're familiar with John Locke is associated with empiricism and that Rene Descartes is associated with rationalism. Now, psychological science is born. The first psychologist came up with a laboratory, and he is German, so the W's are pronounced with a V. Wilhelm Wundt. And this individual, Wilhelm Wundt, he established the first psychology laboratory in Germany. So this is very important because now we have a lab, and now we can trace the origins of psychology to this gentleman right here. Now, what you need to know about Wilhelm, not only that he had the first lab, but also he added two key elements, and that's measured observations and experiments. So when you conduct an experiment, you measure the observations, and then it could be replicated, it could be done again. So, very, very important. Now, the student of Wundt was this gentleman right here. He was British. His name was Edward B. Tickner. And he kept what Wundt started, and he kept going. He added on to the legacy of psychology. Now, he focused on something called introspection, which is self-reporting data. Reporting on sensations in reaction to stimuli. So, for example, he might show someone a rose, and he might say, all right, how does this make you feel? What do you think about this? What images? So he was having people report to stimuli. Now, remember, his experiments were not what we would do in today's times, but you have to start somewhere. Now, Edward B. Tickner, you need to know that he used introspection, but you also need to associate this word with him, structuralism. He used introspection for a view of the mind's structure. In other words, he wanted you to talk about how you felt about something and what you thought about something, because he was trying to get a view of the mind's structure. So he used introspection to try and get an interpretation of the mind. He was a professor at Cornell. He created the PhD program. He focused on the what and how things are working. But for Edward B. Tickner, make sure you know that he focused on introspection and structuralism. Now, let's talk about Mr. William James. And now we have an American philosopher. Now, when it comes to William James, yes, he studied thoughts and feelings and behaviors, which is, very along the line of psychology. But he believed that thinking developed because it was adaptive. It helped our survival. In other words, thinking ultimately was a way for people to survive. And he, William James, was what we would call a functionalist. He focused on functionalism. Mental and behavioral processes function to help an organism flourish. So we would process information to help us get to the very best potential that we could ultimately achieve. So William James, he taught the concept of functionalism. And yes, he said that our consciousness, it serves as a function, and what purpose does it serve? He had a lab in Harvard, and he did say the past experience affects psychological responses. But ultimately, what you need to know is that William James was a functionalist because it helped us survive. So we did talk a little bit about where psychology started, but now let's try and figure out, where does psychology fit? There's all of these classes you have to take, but where does psychology fit in? Let me explain where psychology fits in. Well, first of all, there are some sciences called the natural sciences, and in parentheses it says the hard sciences. It says we study the universe by the laws of nature, like biology and chemistry. These are the hard sciences. Now, they're not called the hard sciences because, these are so difficult. No. What we mean by the hard sciences is that they have absolute answers. They are 100% true. Now, there's another type of science that you could take, and these are called the social sciences, or they're called the soft sciences. Now, they're called the soft sciences because they are mostly true. However, there could be some exceptions. But when we're studying people and human beings, we can only say, hey, this is mostly true. The study of social life in groups and individually, like sociology and psychology. So, in reference to the hard sciences are the natural sciences like biology and chemistry. And then you have what we call the social sciences or the soft sciences like sociology or psychology.